Well, I'd like first to thank you for coming, of course, and to this discussion on the topics of talking robots and language and interaction between humans and these artificial agents that we call robots. I would also like to thank the Institut Français and the Université de Turku for hosting both my visit here in Finland and this event in the European School. So we're going to talk about these artificial entities that we call social robots, socially interactive robots and conversational agents, by trying to question the technological situation on the one hand, and on the other hand, the more or less correct or the more or less erroneous vision of what is expected of and what is understood by the very term social when we talk about social robot. So indeed, beyond the commercial hype that can be seen in designer advertisements or in academic applications for research grants, there is a major theoretical point to be discussed that can be summarized as follows. What is or should be social in a social robot? So I'm going to take something like 45 minutes to introduce all this question. And actually I'm about to say very obvious things because you as speaker, you already know those things as practical matters. So what I will be doing, except maybe when I will be talking about robots per se, what I will be doing is just unveil those things as knowledge objects. So, what is social in social robot? Yeah, don't interrupt me, please. So, to answer this question, we should first ask ourselves what we mean by the term social. And this should feed, I guess, the discussion afterwards. So there are two meanings that I would describe respectively as macroscopic or generic, and a more microscopic meaning, perhaps more operative. And the two meanings are not opposed to each other, they are complementary. So the first meaning refers to the whole field of political and trade unionist discourse when we talk about social partners, social progress, social care, social democracy, and so on. So here we stand in an etymology of close to the societyness, that which makes society, and that which comes under a form of mutual aid or providential balancing between groups of individuals who do not have the same material or cultural conditions. So in a very general way, the term social here refers to what relates to life or organization of society. So it's etymologically social, socius in Latin, designates the companion and the associate. Now, there's a second meaning, and it is also related to the term companion and associate, but this time it is stripped of its macroscopic and political scope in order to define it in terms of the ways in which exchanges between humans take place. So the social is seen as a form of grammar, a grammar for and a grammar of action. That is to say, the social is observed in forms of interaction, of transactions between bodies that are more or less in the presence of one another, and that are therefore systematically, these bodies, submitted to diverse forms of mutual perception. When I use the term submission, I don't mean the product of an external force that would constrain people, but a mechanism of engagement that is not only ordinary, but also necessary for the concrete organization of everyday life. In other words, an individual because he or she is in the presence of others, takes into account these others and takes on a part of what these others perceive of him or her. So the individual is social because he is public. The individual is social because his presence is a co-presence, and actually this co-presence is monitors in the interaction as a member of any social situation. So in my presentation, I will use the term social in this sense, not to refer to society or the world of employment, but to refer to a certain mode of transaction or exchange between individuals, a certain mode of presence, a mode of engagement in a singular situation through actions that unfold in the here and now of a social situation. So the body of an individual is a vehicle for manipulating the environment, meaning for being in the world. And this mode of presence implies a work of interpretation of the world, which is massively pre-reflexive, which means that I act in the world without necessarily thinking about it. Exactly when you cross the street, you analyze the situation, so you interpret the world, but you don't have to think about the fact that you're analyzing the traffic, right? Okay. So individuals are not just transmitters or recipients of information. They are actors, social actors, who interpret the world, mobilize norms to regulate and organize their daily exchanges and do things with what they say. So people are participants. And the mind, the self, is inextricably embedded in a community and draws from that community tools to produce meaning and primarily language and the categories of experience that language offers. So the individual mind itself is produced through collective cultural apprenticeship. And speaking means borrowing words from a community, shaping oneself and one utterances by using shared means. So, as a result of this process, in every language conduct, the individual and society are intertwined. Now, what is it that distinguishes a social robot from a copier or a food processor? As you may know, food processor in French, we call that robot mixer. Well, there's a difference, I'm sure you know that. As aesthetic objects, social robots are intended to affect people mentally in the form of attachment, expression of emotion, but also coordination or expression of self. The very term robot is related to the Czechoslovak word robota, which means forced labor. And its first use is attributed to a play from Karel Capek's, which is Ruhr, the Universal Robots of Rossum in 1920s. So I don't have an extract of the piece, but I do have a film version of the piece, and I will show you an extract right away. The synopsis is quite similar to the one 80 years later of the series, maybe you know it, Battlestar Galactica. The idea is that by designing more sensitive and versatile machines, they end up turning against humans, like species competition. So the year is 1935. The director is Alexander Andrievsky, and you will see very funny things about the different kind of way they would imagine by that time how to communicate with artificial agents.
Универсальный рабочий. Рипля. Рур. Точно, сила и быстрота реакции. Сегодня звук и радиоволна. Завтра речь и моя мысль. Мысль, так как процесс мышления тоже материален.
Инженер, это принадлежит.
Самый великий человек.
Сейчас, во время кризиса, это безумие. Я никогда не слышал о кризисе в военной промышленности. Простите, я не военный, но мне кажется, что танки и броненосцы куда страшнее, чем эти игрушки. О да, я очень уважаю дредноут, но я предпочел бы, чтобы экипаж на нем был вот с такими железными нервами.
So it's interesting how they imagine the different ways of communication with the robots. First through the simple frequencies, and then language, and then thought. Well, there's also an interesting ideology about the materiality of thought, of course. Okay, so now let's skip to the domain of human-robot interaction studies. And I have to say a few words about the difference between what we call HRI, human-robot interaction, and robotics per se. And one way of understanding the difference is that whereas robotics is concerned with the creation of physical robots and how these robots manipulate the physical world, HRI is concerned with how robots interact with people in the social world. So, for example, when the humanoid Asimo that you can see here, I don't know if I can launch the video. Yeah.
What do you recognize?
This one. Yeah. Perfect. Okay, so when the humanoid Asimo climbs the stairs, for example, in a house, or pushes a trolley in an office, it perceives and acts in the physical world alone, and must deal with the physics of its own body and environment. Now, when the same robot brings coffee to a group of office workers or is involved in chases children in a yard, it deals with the physical movement necessary for these actions, of course, but it has also he needs to consider the social aspects of the environment. For example, where the children or office workers might be, how to approach them in an appropriate way. So it means that he needs to master some social rules of interaction. And I can show you another piece of video here, which is the same robot actually. It's a cousin. No. It's in an experiment where you have two people in front of the robot, and the activity is that the robot is supposed to show and discuss images, which are reproductions of paintings, to two humans.
Do you recognize?
No,
In any case, it's hard to recognize anything. The artist did that on purpose, and he gave names to his paintings that doesn't seem to fit. This painting that you just looked at is called Young Girl. The artist wants to excite your imagination with this way of painting. You will also need some imagination with the next painting that I want to show you. It is from a different artist. His name is Sponsor. Do you see the yellow and white painting out there? We will take a closer look at it now. What do you think? Is that even a painting?
No, that's an egg. It doesn't look like a painting.
Yes, and it's difficult to decide. You could try looking at it from below. Then you can see that it is built from multiple layers of wood. The artist, Sponsor, said that he likes.
So the strange things they have on their head are not their hair, but sensors, right? Okay. So those social rules that are needed may be quite obvious for humans, such as recognizing other partners, knowing who is the target of the game, saying you're welcome when someone says thank you. But for a robot, of course, all these rules and social norms are unknown and require the attention of the robot designer. And these concerns make the issues surrounding the domain of HRI different from those addressed solely in the field of robotics. And they involve both computer scientists, but also sociologists, psychologists, linguists, teachers, and so on. So what makes this domain unique? Clearly the interaction of human with social robots is at the heart of this research area. And these interactions typically include physically embodied robots, and their embodiment makes them inherently different from other computer technologies. Those social robots are seen on many occasions as social actors with cultural meaning and a strong impact on contemporary and future society. To say that a robot is embodied does not mean that it is simply a computer with legs and wheels. It is about understanding how to design this embodiment, both in terms of software and hardware, as is the case in robotics, and in terms of the effects on people and the kinds of interactions they can have with such a robot. So in other words, the embodiment of a robot sets physical constraints on how it can perceive and act in the world. But it also represents an opportunity for interaction with people, what we call affordance. So the physical constitution of the robot encourages people to respond in a way similar to how they interact with other people. The robot's similarity to humans allows them to use their experience of human-human interaction in human-robot interaction. And these experiences could be very useful in framing an interaction, but they can also be a source of frustration if the robot does not meet the user's expectation. It could lead to frustration and even repulsive feelings. So this domain of HRI and social robotics within it focuses on the development of robots that are able to interact with people in various everyday environments. And this poses technical challenges resulting from the dynamics and the complexity of humans and the social environment. It also opens up design challenges related to the appearance, behavior, and sensing capabilities of robots to inspire and guide interaction. So from a psychological perspective, this domain offers a unique opportunity to study human affect, cognition, and behavior when confronted with non-human agents. Now, if an everyday person interacts with a robot, they will not care about its internal architecture or the computer language used, or the script, or the mechanical design, but what we call the affordance. So what it can do, what it looks like, and how it interacts or communicates with the person. And that's what we would like to focus on in this domain. This brings us to this class of robots that we call social robots. So there is a kind of a classical definition of social robots that I reproduced here. It is classic because it comes from a seminal article. It was written almost 20 years ago. And it's also completely futuristic as it refers to cognitive processes that AI, artificial intelligence systems, are far from. A more recent definition that I gave you below from another researcher, Brazil, in 2016, robots that are designed to interact with people in a natural interpersonal way. So this second definition places more emphasis on a research horizon. And to situate those two definitions, I would recall that historically, the development of robots in terms of research field was first carried out by analogy with social animals and insects. And I can show you some animals. Do you know the turtles of the Professor Walter? It's 1945.
In a simple villa on the outskirts of Bristol lives Dr. Gray Walter, a neurologist, who makes robots as a hobby. They are small, and he doesn't dress them up to look like men. He calls them tortoises, and so cunningly have their insides been designed that they respond to the stimuli of light and touch in a completely lifelike manner. This model is named Elsie, and she sees out of a photoelectric cell which rotates above her body. When light strikes the cell, driving and steering mechanism sends her hurrying towards it. If she brushes against any object in her path, contacts are operated that turn the steering away, and so automatically she takes avoiding action. Mrs. Walter's pet is Elmer, Elsie's brother, and the darker vest. He works in exactly the same way. Dr. Walter says that his electronic toys work exactly as though they have a simple two-cell nervous system, and that with more cells they will be able to do many more tricks. Already Elsie has one up on Elmer. When her batteries begin to fail, she automatically runs home to her kennel for charging up, and in consequence can live a much gayer life.
So it looks like a proto-vacuum, robotic vacuum cleaner, right? So you will notice when I was mentioning the analogy with animals that here we have a particular conception of the notion of the word social, because it is what makes society, and that is to say precisely a set, a whole, like ants or bees, where individuality is superfluous, even irrelevant. And in fact, in the early 2000s, some authors used the term sociable robots to differentiate themselves from this analogy with social insects. So it would enable them to highlight the affective and the empathic and individualized dimension of artificial entities. So, one big question. why on earth are we so far from the ambitions, the research horizon, as stated in the two definitions I have given? And why are we so far from a series like Westworld, for example? The reason is very simple. The solution is very complex. The reason I gave it at the beginning of my remarks. It has to do with the profoundly social, even sociological nature of human language. Language is in itself social for the people before it's a sociological object for researcher. That is to say that language is naturally the product of a co-creation from reciprocal conducts or actions. So that means that interaction precedes syntax, the syntax of interaction precedes the sentence syntax. Interaction is the reason why there is grammar. Now, if we produce AIs that are capable of maintaining interpersonal relations, or worse, of conversing with humans, then we have to develop models that are capable of simulating the properties of natural human language. So what are these properties? There are many properties, as you would imagine, so I'll just give you three very important ones, and this will be my conclusion on this point. To introduce those three properties, it must be stressed that the meaning of language, that is the meaning we produce in our utterances when we speak, is based on the circumstances of its emergence in the here and now of social activities. This means that we cannot grasp the full meaning of a speech produced if we only have recourse to the propositional or semantic content of the discourse. Thus, linguistic forms have a meaning, or what we call an indexical value, insofar as their meaning is based on several contextual links. Conversely, this indexical value contained in linguistic forms is in turn such that each instance, each term, each social action contributes to the reconstruction and the update of the relevant context. So how this meaning works, and so I'm going to give you three elements of the answer through those three properties of human language. And now I'm going to say very easy and very knowable things for you. I may use strange words, but I'm really talking about things you master because everyone is expert of his own language. So I will just unveil things that you already know. So the first property is what we call intelligibility or accountability of practices. Basically, it's very simple. When we perform an action, be it a gesture or a turn of speech in interaction, at the same time as we perform it, we provide resources as instructions to grasp the meaning of what is being done. So a social action, in this sense, encompasses both the action and the rules to understand it. Think of a chess piece. When you move the knight, you're doing this L form, and by doing this L form, you're giving the description of your gesture as you're doing it. So the action and the description of the action is done in the same movement. So every social action is a coupling between an action and its account or its description. Apart from any question of well or not well spoken, or moral or not moral, of agreeing or not agreeing, there is, one might say, a minimal layer meaning to actions which deals with the relevance problem, or the adequacy, or the appropriateness. The second property is also very simple. It's the way in which participants perform actions in a finely synchronized way with each other. We call that sequentiality. It's basically very close to the way you synchronize with people when you're walking in the street and you just want to avoid collision, right? So you're coordinating all the time with people as you are in a social situation. I think here again, there are examples everywhere, well, and I would say anytime you speak with someone. So what it means is that in order to produce meaningful actions, meaningful terms, and in order to make them understandable, relevant, we rely on the timing of those actions. When we say something, this something is analyzed or analyzable as first succeeding to something, second accomplishing something in itself, and third as allowing continuation. And the three occur at the same time. I mean that a social behavior relies, regarding its signification, its meaning, on those three temporalities, the past, the present, and the future. And the past doesn't have to be 1 hour before or 5 minutes before. It can be simply the previous conduct. A very simple example. Someone summons you and says, "What time is it?" And you answer, "I don't know." Your answer makes specific reference to the previous term and actually make it as a question and make it as a request. It accomplishes the work that it may accomplish as a term in its own right. That is, you display that by saying, "I don't know," your incapacity to respond, maybe because you have no watch. And also it projects a trajectory for the following interaction. For example, the person will leave and ask someone else. And it's the same with the future. You don't have to be, it doesn't have to be the next 5 minutes, or it could be just the next half second. So it's very important, this question of sequentiality of actions is three temporality-based dimension. Okay, last property, it's the categorization processes that are at work in the interaction. And it's also a very basic property that you use all the time. This dimension is very interesting when we are keen on studying robots, which are often given with a quite excessive, in a quite excessive way, characters such as conversational partners, companions, assistants, lovers, and so on. So identities or categories are resources for producing appropriate actions. It is quite simple. You do not address your child or a policeman in the same way. But interestingly, the very fact that you address your child or the policeman differently make those categories relevant. So it becomes even more interesting if we imagine that a parent talking to a child who is actually dressed up as a policeman. Will the parent make the categories child and policeman still relevant, and how he would do that? So it's only by studying the behavior in great detail that we can tell that. And note that the parents' goal here are not to make this or that category relevant, child, policeman, but to play with the child. So categories are resources for organizing activities and rarely goals in themselves, except maybe in children games where the category is the object of the game. So, and by mobilizing such and such categories, the parent participates in the socialization of the child to these categories. And this dimension is no exception to robots. If you want a companion, an interactional partner, a lover, well, you will display it. You will display those categories in the very interactions you have with an artificial entity. So if you need to develop a robot as a competent speaker, those dimensions have to be taken into account. And this is not all. Because when people talk, they don't produce term for the sake of producing term. they actually produce sequences, for example. For my example, what time is it? I don't know. What time is it is a term. I don't know is a term. What time is it? I don't know is a sequence. But they actually produce sequence in order to organize activities. So they're doing work, okay, and they use the structure they can use to accomplish that, sequences, terms. So to develop an artificial competent speaker, you have to take into account the different levels of the social action, the term, the sequence, the activity, because those are contexts to produce and interpret meaning. I don't know if I can stop here and we can start talking. Okay. Okay, so of course beyond their propositional content, linguistic elements convey the social order and the ideologies of linguistic community. And this brings us to our final point, that of language socialization. Because to be a competent speaker is to master these properties, the three properties I tried to explain, and to incorporate them into one's practices. Needless to say that the state of the art in terms of developing interactional skills for artificial intelligence is far from mastering these different dimensions and levels of actions. So, and again, you will be struck by the gigantic contrast between the great complexity of modeling all this and the extreme ease without even thinking about, which is why it's easy, actually. The extreme ease with which you can navigate between the levels of action and articulate these different properties of language. So I would like to conclude with, by talking about socialization and in particular language socialization, and therefore another question. Is it worthwhile to use technological means based on artificial intelligence to teach children? And then what would be the teacher position, for example? So I don't want to circumscribe, of course, the following discussion, but I will just recall a simple principle to explain teaching in general and language learning in particular. All human interaction is in itself socializing. Subjectivities, positions are negotiated and achieved, not given. This means that in socializing it is socializing for everyone, not only for children being taught, but also for the teachers themselves and for the parents. To put it differently, colleagues socialize as concrete instance of colleagues. Lovers socialize as concrete instances of lovers. I want to show you an example of socialization. I've been recently working on prenatal ultrasound sessions. And, well, it's basically you have a mom and a dad, a baby in a belly, and an echographer in front of a machine equipped with a screen. At a certain point, the parents want to know what they see. And this requires an apprenticeship. And in this extract, the issue is to find out what the sex of the baby might be.
Là, il est sur. Alors, on c'est sur la face haute. Alors, là, il peut être fluide, il peut être latéralement, latéralement gauche, en arrière, ou malheureusement, ce qu'on n'aime pas, c'est beaucoup en bas. Oh, ok.
Est-ce que vous parlez?
Alors, ceci est Ouais. C'est difficile. Alors, moi, je vois très très bien, on voit très très bien, mais ce sont que les pièces. Alors, c'est un peu difficile. Hein. On voit beaucoup de parties de les pièces. Là, on voit pas les cuisses dans l'air.
Ouais, voilà, c'est ça. Et, oui, c'est ce qu'on voit un peu à droite, là, voilà, c'est ça. Excellent. Petite fille.
Alors, c'est super, parce qu'on s'est dit tout à l'heure, mais il faut qu'on voit.
Bah oui, de côté, déjà.
Et vous savez, il va vers vous, moi, je une fille, un accompagnement.
Merci, bébé.
Okay, so my argument here is to say that socialization occurs in a very neat phenomenon, and that as soon as you have apprenticeship, you have socialization, even in this adult interaction. And in this example, the practice of is the practice of visualizing a baby's body on a screen, and it's at the heart of a socialization to what actually characterizes prenatal ultrasound session. Okay, back to human language. Learning a language is about containing within oneself a particular intelligible and cultural subjectivity. Children in particular are language learners and at the same time cultural apprentices, meaning competent speakers and members of a social-cultural group in the making. So socialization is thus not only about reproducing social classes, but refers to multiple forms where on many occasions humans are spontaneously led to act, speak, share, teach, and learn, of course. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, it works. So thank you very much, Nicolas. Merci beaucoup. Our next presentation will be by Teppo Jakonen, who's working. So the next presentations will be from a delegation from University of Turku. So Nicola Jakonen works at the Academy of Finland. She's a research fellow, and as I said previously, so working in about languages as well. And he's also working on a new project, Telepresence Robot Mediated Embodied Interaction in Hybrid Language Learning Environments. It's a project that started in this year, in 2021 to 2026.
Is the mic working okay? Seems like it is. Okay, thank you very much, Institut Français, the European School, for organizing this and having us here. One reason why I was very, very happy to come here is the fact that I'm also a former student of the European School, not here in Helsinki, but I did my baccalaureate in Belgium a bit more than 20 years ago now. I started thinking about this when thinking about what to say here. The reason is that if I think of my time as a student at the European School, things were very different in terms of communications technology. And that's the kind of entry point to today's theme that I have. So I will be talking about slightly different things compared to Nicolas, not so much about social robots, but more so about communicative robots and communicative tools that can perhaps change some ways in which we communicate with other human beings. So I only have one slide, and it looks like this. I thought I would show this because I was expecting that there might be some students, and perhaps for some students, some of the devices that you will see on this slide are not so familiar. So looking at the thing that is on the left-hand side is a landline telephone. So I assume that many of you are actually familiar with it, but this used to be how most of the phone calls back in the day when I was a European school student used to be made. So the phone was fixed to a location, and you could move, pretty much as the cable allowed you to move. So that would be a couple of meters, I suppose. Then at some point, or even before that time, came the mobile phone. And the second and the third picture are examples of early examples of mobile phones. Compared to today's smartphones, they look completely different. Weighed about a ton, and there was no big screen that you could use to do stuff. The phone that you have on the kind of second to rightmost image is one phone that I had, maybe one of the first phones, kind of early 2000s or so. So, and you can see that it had a very small screen, so, it was not a smartphone. You could basically phone somebody or text somebody. Of course, then came the smartphones. You had internet in the phone. You could do a lot of other things in addition to making phone calls. But basically, with the invention of the mobile phone, this kind of communication over long distance changed radically. So, we were able to connect with our friends who were not at their homes. So, again, if I think back to my time as a student, if we wanted to meet somebody, we would phone their home, then fix a time when we would meet in some location. And then there was no way of announcing the other if we were, for example, running late. Now that is pretty simple with smartphones. So the kind of robots that I have been investigating and will continue to investigate in this project is one that you will see in the right-hand image. So it is actually called a Telepresence Robot, which might be a bit misleading in the sense that it's not really a tool with artificial intelligence. It's not the kind of social robot that Nicola was talking about. Instead, it is perhaps more akin to mobile phones in the sense that it is a tool with which you can make video calls to somebody else. But in addition to that, you can also move this device from a remote location. So when compared to smartphones, tablets, having a video call via them, mobility works in a slightly different way. So perhaps there are more opportunities to, move this device, perhaps control a bit more what you see of the other's home, perhaps, or even control a bit more with whom you are in interaction with, if it is an event such as what we have here, where there are many, many speakers. If I were following this from home, this kind of robot would be here and I could drive around the hall chatting with people in the audience. Technological change is one thing, but perhaps a more interesting question for us as social scientists and as humanities researchers is, how do these technological changes change the way we conduct our social life and the kinds of social relations we have with other human beings? I think they do, and they have done so with these changes in the history of phoning, for example. So I already mentioned this idea that you can announce people if you are running late, but we know that we use smartphones in a number of other contexts and for a number of other reasons as well. If we are lost, we can use the phone to navigate in a strange city. Sometimes we might use it during lessons in classrooms as well. If we don't know something, we can quickly Google things. So it has already transformed our social life. These kinds of telepresence robots that you see here in this image as well, they have not been investigated from this perspective so much. So much of the research has been, conducted by technology specialists, engineers, and so on, and they may have a slightly different perspective to the functions that these have compared to us who are interested in the social side of things. So, and this is something that I am interested in and will continue to research. It could be that in the future these kinds of movable video call technologies somehow transform our sense of place, what social meaning we give to place, if we can participate in events, even if we are somewhere else. Another interesting thing that these could change is, what do we think constitutes a human being? What do we think constitutes a machine? And perhaps one example that I can give you about this, and I think this applies to things like tablets as well. So often when my kids make a video call to their grandparents, for example, using a tablet or an iPad, they might do things like play hide and seek with the grandparents. So there might be somebody who hides the iPad somewhere, and the kids start looking for it. If they are not very successful in finding it, the grandparents in the other location, they might give clues, they might say something so that the kids can hear them. So in this sense, and in these kinds of moments, the device is perhaps already working as some kind of a social being, some kind of a, at least like a sit-in for the grandparent, like a substitute for them. So perhaps in these kinds of moments and in these kinds of practices, we will see this blurring of boundaries between humans and machines. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Teppo Jaakkonen. I was wondering, now that we talked about movement, about telephone now, I wanted to ask maybe in the public, when you make a sign to someone and you're asking, for instance, can you call me with your hands? How will your cell like this? Okay. Because I know this from like my nephew, for instance, he will do this. And it's suddenly a new movement because of course the device has changed. And now I'm wondering if we need to teach a robot, if that's the correct verb, how will he recognize then this idea of calling? So thank you very much. Our next presentation will be by Marjut Johansson. She's a professor at the Department of French at the University of Turku, and her research right now on our interaction and also on artificial intelligence. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for myself and all the Robolang group that we are here today, Liisa Peura, Teppo Jaakkonen, and myself. As Liisa will be following me, I'm not talking about social robots, but I have been taking a larger perspective to the first topic of tonight, artificial intelligence and language studies. I was thinking that maybe several of you are students here at the European School. How many of you? Okay. And maybe it's not the kind of question that I ask you now, but think about where you would be like to be in the future. Would it be something to do with languages? I learned that you are learning a lot of languages here, and it's a great thing. And if you have worked or are in the working life already, maybe you have encountered artificial intelligence in your professions or in your everyday life. We are getting robot vacuum cleaners and stuff like that in our houses. So it's getting to be a very everyday phenomenon for all of us. But if you are thinking about languages and artificial intelligence, I think that we as linguists and scientists in humanities have to think about what this brings to us. I have only 8 slides, but I will give you a quick view what this means for us. So what is the future going to look for us in language and translation studies? What we as experts would need to have, or if you are orienting towards the study here, so what will you meet in the academia? 2 of these domains are specific to language studies, foreign language teaching and learning, and multilingual translations. We educate or give teaching to those fields for language specialists that are going to be translators, terminologists, or language teachers. However, in the language studies and translation studies, very many students become experts in multicultural companies, they become diplomats and journalists and work in human resources. So in very different types of professions where they need language expertise. So in multilingual translation, what is happening now is that machine translation is the word of the today. So how a machine, by machine learning and from translations that human has made and formed a database for translation, how a machine learning is working for translators in orders that it produces a translation from one language to another. So it needs something that has been already done by humans, those translations. But what is interesting here, and what would be my point in the end, I can reveal it already now, is the thing that Nicolas made a reference already in his talk, is how a machine interprets meaning. And machines today are not perfect. This has been the question that has been asked already in the beginning of 1960s, and it's still not resolved. So humans, even though we have machines that can make translations, and they could be very accurate in some text types, humans are needed for post-editing. So the meaning has to be verified by humans and trained translators. At the University of Turku, we have a very strong department of digital linguistics that is working with the technology department. And they are working on modeling on text, the modeling that is based on text resources and how a machine could detect from huge masses of text different text genres and their linguistic features. For instance, if you read a news story, what are the typical features, linguistic features of that news story? Something has happened, and what is the order of the things that is told in that text. So they are working on different types of internet text and trying to find out how a machine could identify those text types. And then interaction, very short, brief examples. You have encountered, I'm sure, in different services, chatbots, like the one I have an example here from that is on the right, Finnair's chatbot. Hi there, my name is Finn, and I'm Finnair's non-human chatbot assistant. If you have tried one chatbot, how often have you received the kind of answer you wanted? Not very often. They are quite stupid and they don't haven't learned that much. The other one, if you haven't tried, there are some entertainment chatbots, like EasyBot is the one who is one of the most famous. You can talk to it or write to it and it answers. But very often they are very scripted, very simple phrases like formule de politesse and how are you, what is your hobby? Very simple questions and answers. If you try to talk to them about Brexit, for instance, or politics, they give very random answers. We have also this project with robots, social robot and language learning, foreign language learning, and how a robot could be used in school context. But I leave this to Lisa. And I jump to my conclusion, and we need very much, and I think that everybody in this field should be interested in understanding, first of all, what is language use, how we as humans communicate with each other, and with what kind of objectives, what do we need to and want to accomplish when we talk to each other. But the challenge is always, how do we interpret meanings? Are we always sure that when we talk to each other that we understand the other? And when we are talking with an artificial intelligence or a machine, does the machine understand what I'm trying to say? And I think that we need to focus very much in this work with artificial intelligence on interpreting meaning, and consider and see the limits that machines put on us or that we put on them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Margaret Johansson. And I was wondering if we keep the discussion about this telephone. I still remember the phone number of my best friend when I was 6 years old, but I absolutely don't remember the phone number of my very good friends now. How come? Maybe because in the cell phone you just need to press in the name of your friend, you just don't know the number. So aren't we transferring our intelligence in a way in these devices? That's maybe a question. You mentioned perfection also, the imperfection of a robot. Maybe that's something that can be discussed or discussion. Maybe imperfection is good with robots. So our next presentation will be by Elisa Peora. So she's completing the trio of Robotics. Robolang, merci, pardon. You can easily combine all these app names and robotic things. So Robolang, merci. So this is her presentation now. Yes.
Yes, hello to everybody, and thank you for the introduction. And thank you, Institut Français, for inviting me here. It's a pleasure. And it's also an honor to be here with all these experts, since I'm only a PhD student. So I'm in the early steps in my research career. I am a language teacher at the city of Espoo. I teach French, English, and Swedish for small children in primary school. But I work with a robot, and that's what makes it very interesting. And I try to answer here to some of those questions that's been raised already here, that what is the notion of social, what does it mean to be social, and also is it desired to have robots within the language education and language learning. But first, some background. We have been discussing about telephones and all that, and I find it fascinating how the notion of being social have evolved from the prehistoric campfires to the humanoid robots. How many of you talk to your car? Or how many of you talk to elevator buttons? I do. I mean, it's quite interesting that we have started to be social with machines that our brain has not been trained for, and we have the sort of tendency to create human traits to things that are not human at all. And we have robots everywhere around us nowadays, but most of the robots are performing a task. They are assembling cars or sorting out books in the library. But when the robots get the face, our social brain wakes up, as we have here Dominic as well. So there's a different kind of interaction, and that takes place in the classroom as well. Yes, and well, in the previous slide, there was also the city of Espoo, because they've been sponsoring Dominic here for this pilot project, so they are involved in this as well. First, a quick review of what's been found out by the research this far. We know that people prefer physical agents over virtual agents or simulated avatars. Nicola was talking about the embodiment. Dominic here has the body and the face, and that's, we have the shared physical space, and it makes it more interesting than when talking to a phone or a laptop. Research has also shown that pupils are more focused and more motivated to work with a robot than with a laptop or a computer. It's also proven to reduce the language anxiety. For example, my pupils, they say that they love to be with Dominic because it doesn't think, or they don't need to think what he or she thinks of them. So it's sort of more stress-free situation. And I also like the fact that the robots, they sort of are more egalitarian. They can offer native-like input everywhere in the world, even in places where sort of native speakers are not available otherwise. There have been quite a few studies already done within this field, but many of them has been done so that the robot has been brought from outside to the classroom. We in Espoo, we are living with the robot, so that makes a difference. And what will we aim to find out here? We are sort of studying what is the impact of a social robot on learning outcomes in French pronunciation, and how does the robot motivate and enhance persistence in learning. And also it's interesting to see how to build a bond, a social bond between a robot and a pupil, and how does that affect learning, and whether there are any transfer effects in relation to that. So there are quite huge areas to be studied. Here in this picture you see there's one of my pupils. Actually there are two, and mostly my pupils, they work in dyads. The robot works best when it's in small groups, 1 or 2 persons, and then the pupils, they help each other. They sort of, they are active learners, and they serve as mediators to each other. They are helping each other out, and they sort of try to figure out whether the interaction functions well, or if it doesn't, whether it's because of the technical problems, or whether there's something within the language input that doesn't go through with the robot. So in that sense, it sort of increases the language awareness as well, and that's sort of a bonus effect of that. Of the fact of having a robot in the classroom. Also, it doesn't, it's not enough to be competent in the language. You may know the language very well, you may have a rich vocabulary and all that, but you need to be willing to communicate. And we've been seen to be quite shy at least I was when I started learning French. So with the robot, it might be easier it's to talk and train the language as well. And also we have still very valid theories from the 70s, the zone of proximal development. We need to keep that one in mind as well all the time when designing tasks, learning targets with the robot. They need to be challenging enough to promote learning, and that can take place easily when the learning task with the robot is made in a game format. Okay, I'll just quickly show you one of the studies or experiments I carried out last year. It was about my first article and on an experiment where we were sort of seeing whether pupils might learn pronunciation implicitly as native language learners do. So they were not taught the pronunciation rules beforehand. So we created a game, Défi Demi, which had 3 different levels, and this first one was the easiest one, and the students were able to proceed until the 3rd level. And they all got through this test or this challenge game. They had 2 weeks' time to do it. And the focus of these words and target words was with nasal vowels and fricative sounds that we don't have in Finnish, but you do have in French, that are very difficult for Finnish small children to produce. And in the end, well, there was a pre-test and post-test, an online questionnaires, and I'll show you some of the results here. So here you can see that actually it is probably desirable to have a robot in a language learning context. In a pronunciation sort of way, here you can see 2 columns. There are the 4th graders and 6th graders, and indeed learning took place. So the previous research was sort of gaining now more evidence on the fact that it might work well within language learning as well. This is also quite interesting. As you noticed already with Dominique, the speech recognition is not its best. Actually, it is quite stupid, and the amount of artificial intelligence is quite small in it, and that means that children need to do a lot of repetitions while they are sort of trying to pronounce the word correctly. And here you can see that there are a few children who repeated even almost 100 times that certain very long or difficult word, but they didn't give up. They persisted. They wanted to get it through. The amount of the number of repetitions did not affect the learning outcomes as such, but I find it interesting to see that it didn't reduce the motivation. They persisted and they still thought that it's a fun way to learn. Okay, there are some columns about their emotions, what they experienced, and they all sort of thought that it is rather positive. The column number 3 here, it's about if they felt anxious, and there were pupils also who felt anxious, but it didn't sort of hamper the joy of learning, so actually they all felt that as well. Also, this slide is quite interesting. The pupils, they sort of felt very self-efficient. As you see, they sort of were highly rating their activity of competence after this challenge came. And it's also nice to see that the question number 4 there, that I think I would have learned better in another method, they had suggestions, but they liked the idea. And also, there you can read some of the remarks they made themselves afterwards. We were supposed to do some delayed post-tests, but then COVID came along and we didn't have the possibility to do with the same students anymore that test. But I'm having a new group of students now. I still get the same kind of feelings and results that this, in terms of pronunciation, it works very well. But that's that's not the only thing. I think that with the robot, it's also very important to teach robot literacy. And it's been defined as an ability to have appropriate relationship with intelligent robots. But what does it actually mean? We have these critical literacy, digital natives, we talk about that, and we have media literacy, even written down in the curriculum in Finland, and also coding. But that's mainly used in subjects like science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. So we don't have that in language learning yet. And I think language learning can be a very nice area to do, but focus on that as well. The robot is not only a means of learning, it can be also the object of learning. With my students, I've seen that, first of all, the content production is important. They need to know that all interaction is based on scripts and coding, so they need to see that side as well. And that's, for example, in the beginning here, when you were trying to talk to Dominic, he didn't understand because the script where you were using was not the same as being coded into it. The whole robot was all empty when it came to our class, so we've been filling it ourselves. My pupils, they know that Dominic lives in a suitcase, and they know that it needs to have space there and a peace and quiet when talking to it, and they sort of understand the nature of the machine's autonomy a little bit. And that is very, very crucial, I think, and that needs to be kept in mind all the time. Also, it's nice to see that the fact of having a robot brings along a lot of spontaneous word learning. I give my students free space to sort of live with the robot, and they bring teddy bears to sleep with. Say, one morning a boy came to my class with this cartoon box saying, you know, Lisa, I made a home for Dummy. It can't be always in a suitcase, so there's this box with different kind of items in it. And also they put Dummy in a different kind of situation. They were looking either the football matches or Eurovision, so they sort of transform him or her into that situation. And in that sense, they sort of produce different kind of learning environments for themselves without me, you know, giving it as a task. But I have given them also a task related to the friendship and the social bond. We are doing sort of portfolio works, as we call carnet d'amitié, where they fill in information they learn about Dominique, and they have free hands to fill it. And there it's interesting to see what kind of social attributes they give to robots. I have not analyzed that part yet, but this 18-item scale is very much in use, and it's about warmth and competence and discomfort. And my pupils here, we have some preliminary results already on that. They seem to consider it as very competent and a sort of warm character without having too much discomfort, feelings about disconformity with the robot. And also it's interesting to see here that the control group is feeling some discomfort as well. So I think it all has to do with the robot literacy as well. And the studies carried out elsewhere in the world say that it has an effect whether the robot looks like a male or a female, whether it looks machine-like or human-like, and it's been suggested that female-looking human-like robots are considered warmer and more competent than male machine-like robots. And Dominic here is quite gender neutral, so we don't know yet how the pupils will actually feel about that. So there was lots of things, but I hope I was able to give you some insight of that as well. Thank you.
Thank you, merci beaucoup. Yeah, so of course I want to also bring to your attention that there was a very nice episode of Destination Francophonie on TV5 Monde where Dominique, Mariut and Lisa were talking about their project and Robolang, and it's very nice to have you, the trio from Turku, and of course Role. So thank you very much for all your presentations. There was one question that came to my mind because of my background, I guess, because I'm very sensitive to the notions of, let's say, regional languages, or, for instance, the impact of the accent on. I have an example like this really quickly. A group of a teacher from an Irish background teaching to a full group of English speakers, and the parents started to feel that, oh, all of a sudden my son or my daughter has a Irish accent suddenly, like day to day. And I was just wondering that is working with Dominic could bring at some point a little robot Dominic accent to the pupils. Is that something you realize? There's something in the tone that could impact on their way to pronounce the language? That's maybe a question to you all.
Okay. Yes, I think my pupils know how to talk to a robot. The accent is quite interesting. It's good that you brought it up. When Dominic came, it was all empty, and we sort of fed the first words into it. And when he started talking, it was sort of, I thought that, French is his native language. It's not English or any other language. But you are right. It doesn't have any accent. And but I don't find it sort of dangerous. Sort of, it's not that bad to have. Not that bad is not a good word, but it doesn't hamper the correct way of pronunciation and the prosodic features. It does have some prosodic features as well, but not any accents. No.
Well, I could. We have a data that shows Finnish, Swedish-speaking children learning English, and the school children had learned British English, but that application with the robot understood only American English. So there was a conflict, and of course the young learners were very confused why the robot didn't understand. So there's a lot of tuning of the application, and the kind of learners are the robot.
As another example, I could just add that I discussed with the Québécois version of Alexa a couple of weeks ago, and the moment I was putting some du coup, she was losing it. So. Okay, so now it's maybe the possibility for you to ask your questions, if you have any. I think, as a teacher, I have this feeling sometimes that with my students, I'm walking with them on the path where the grass is growing again. But with robots, it's a new field. It's a new territory. So if there are any questions,
So I have a little question, because I was thinking, actually this robot is more like a toy, I would say, and maybe the children also perceive it as a toy. And so I was wondering, linking it to the first lecture that was given by Nicolas Rollet, that maybe also this type of interaction, type of social interaction that children were also learning, is how to interact in a way with a toy, knowing that it's a toy, and in a way it's fiction. I mean, they do as if they were interacting, knowing that it's not for real, because it's not a real human being, but also being in a playful mindset in a way. No? So I don't know if you had this type of reflection already? Or?
Yeah, this is very true. The toy-likeness comes into mind right away, and the kind of interactions that children or other people might have with social robots. I think that very often there is coded the element of fictive world. For instance, the entertainment chatbot I gave an example of EVBot. if you try to have an interaction with it, it brings out fictive world. Would you like to go out with me? Or with the social robot, the kind of application that we have been using with our with the school children, it makes the kind of questions that couldn't be possible for in the real world. For instance, children are talking about what is your favorite color, they ask from the robot. So it's a fictive kind of interaction. But I think it goes very well with this playfulness and the kind of things that children enjoy, and we adults as well.
Yes, I agree what Mariette said here, totally. And also because we have this risk of anthropomorphization, so we don't want children to give robots to human-like characters even. So, I mean, it's important that they understand it to be a fictional toy or a machine, not a human being. And that's also very important to have in mind.
I can just complete few elements. There are actually two questions in your questions. The thing of what you said about as if is quite an interesting concept, and it's been developed by Sherry Turtle, maybe some of you know, Alone Together, in the book Alone Together. And this concept of as if leads to the idea that embodiment is, well, you can construct a toy, but it has to be alive enough so that the human would interact as if it's alive enough. And so there's different way to embody this artificial agent, but one of the key things is that you have to produce some kind of enjoyment or emotion, empathy, and all these kind of things. And there are many studies that shows that in teaching situations, when you have this kind of empathy, this kind of emotion mirroring, the teaching is working better. So you have those two questions. The embodiment, it has to be alive enough, and also the shape and the kind of emotion, the kind of attachment you can rely on regarding the entity.
Yeah, so I had 3 related questions. So who invented the robot, when and where? Yeah, this one. Dominic. Yeah.
It's coming from SoftBank Robotics. It was first it was a Japanese company, and now it's French. But they completely stopped the production of those. I don't know if you know it, but they completely decided to stop the research development. But they produced the Pepper. Now I think was maybe the first with Romeo and Pepper. But you have to know that when you produce a robot, it takes like maybe 10 years or maybe more, and then they have to sell it and to make it. They have to gain some benefits. So it's a very long stand period between the creation and then the development and then the selling and all the things.
You had also the question of when. The robots, humanoid robots like this, they came out more or less after 2000. And I think that this kind of robot is a little bit more than 10 years old. But what has happened recently, these have become commercialized, so they are not that expensive for schools to buy. So this is one of the things that have brought them into our schools here in Finland as well.
And are we also going to use it in our school to learn language?
Well, this is a challenge for your teachers.
Maybe I could add that this robot can use an application that is called Elias. It's a software that is produced by a Finnish startup, and it has language teaching material in very, very many languages. So, and they will teach your teachers how to use that if your school decides to buy it.
Always me. So yes, I was wondering just after this, this question that what was the, what was the reason why this robot was introduced in schools? Which is the array of reasons? Maybe is it mostly to have a kind of native speaker in class, or is it mostly because maybe in this school there are children with more difficulties to learn, or what are the kind of reasons why it's introduced?
Well, I can give a general answer, and maybe Lisa answers for her school. I think that one of the reasons here in Finland was technological innovation, and that we are so invested in technological innovations. The first time I heard about this software application for language teaching was 2017, when this Utelias company was in slush. And I immediately thought that this would be something very new for us and something that we have to jump into. And what happened after is that Finnish National Board of Education had a program for some Finnish schools to pilot the robot and the software application. So it was from the authorities given to certain schools, for instance in the southwest Finland, to Swedish-speaking schools. And that is when we got into that. So there's this technological development. Robots are not that expensive. Finnish start-up company. We as interested teachers and researchers, and we got together. But of course, individual schools have very many different reasons. And I would say that the teachers have to be some kind of adventurers to have them.
Yes, that's true. And well, the main reason is that we in Finland, we invest in digital native and digital environment and language learning. That's what we get some funding for. And I awfully, really appreciate the city of Espoo, who started to do this pilot project with me, because actually the reason for why I'm having the robot, it's very personal. I have two daughters here, they are sitting there, and I was looking at them while they are talking to their phones. They are not writing any messages anymore, they are talking. I don't know, what do you do? Do you talk to your phone when you try to find information on Google, or do you type it? So I thought that both ways. So I think the oral interfaces, they are more and more common everywhere. People talk, people listen to books, they don't read anymore. So it's sort of the oral interface that is interesting. And also, my daughter was having a summer job in one of the startup companies where she saw a robot for the first time, and then I met the robot as well, and I got very curious about the fact that the actual face does that effect to me. And then we were having this pilot project money in Espoo, and I sort of fed this idea that it would be interesting to test it within teaching. And then we had this pilot project, and that's why I'm here.
And so if I may, it's a pilot project, but will it be extended or to other languages or other classes or other schools?
For instance, city of Tampere has introduced these robots to every primary school. So it has expanded already there. Turku is following, but I don't have a full picture of all the Finnish schools. But but it has been used for Finnish as a second language teaching for adults. It is being used at Turku at one center for those who are learning Finnish migrant adults. It has been used in northern Finland for learning profession, like when you are learning to be a cook or a construction worker. The vocabulary has been taught with the robots. We are publishing a special issue, popular that is for general public in February, and we have some articles about how it has been used in those kinds of situations. So there's quite a big variety of learning situations and language learning where it can be used. But one of the things, the teacher needs to invest a lot in using the machine. That is for certain. And Lisa can tell you all about that.
No, I'm not telling you all about that, but I say just that we need a lot of time and money. I mean, one teacher, me coding, producing the content with my students and putting it, feeding it there and having this research to be done at the same time and the normal daytime teaching. So, and the robot actually is quite stupid. You need to teach it. And the speech recognition is very poor. So we would need engineering, all the university and a group of experts to develop this. But I think this is a good start, and it's good to see where it all starts from. And I like the idea of being able to be within the first steps of robotics, within language learning, to be in it. So, but a lot of things to be done.
Did you want to continue? Okay. Good evening. Thank you for the presentation, also for the event organization. Something came to my mind about, so when we learn a language, we also, it's not only listening, it's also on the mimics, the ways the lips move. So I was wondering if there is research made on that topic, that the robots will have more human characteristics and these features that would perhaps improve more the language learning. Are you aware of such research or? Yeah, exactly. A shape, a more human shape. With moving lips and this characteristics.
It's kind of it's a different question than just the shape, I guess. If you want to make a robot able to, like the Geminoid, which is a very famous from Ishiguro, like you have, it's really close to the human skin and things, and it can move because he has those muscles, and it could be really frightening to have humanoid robots that looks like human, but as you see that very small detail, it's not human, it falls on the famous uncanny valley of cadaver and zombie. So not sure that going more and more into the resemblance of those artificial agents is such a good idea if you want to promote the engagement of people to talk to those entities. But there are huge, actually, literature, for example, on gender and well, what we can call gender studies, social robotics, I guess. And they are focusing on what's the effect of having feminine attributes or masculine attributes regarding how human people would treat these artificial agents. For example, in the course of mathematics, they show, well, they're contradictory results, but in the majority, they show that if you put artificial agents with masculine attributes in a mathematical course, it will be considered as more competent than if with feminine attributes. The problem is that if the participants is a majority of masculine students or feminine students, the result is a bit different. But there's obviously an impact on the shape of the robots, whether it's an animal or human-like, and also on the gender that you can put on the. It's mostly true for conversational agents with avatars are either women or men. It has a strong impact.
There's also some evidence from the kind of robots that I have been investigating. So these video conferencing robots, not necessarily from language learning contexts, but from primary school contexts and kids who have to use this kind of a device in order to participate in classroom teaching. So there's some evidence that things like size and the shape of the robot matter in terms of how the classroom participants form these kinds of social bonds with the remote student. So even if the video conferencing robot doesn't actually look like a human being, certain kinds of attributes might play a role in how the classroom participants accept that person and that robot as part of the community. So in a way there is something similar going on to what Lisa talked about, the social bonds with Dominique, and I guess we can form social bonds with various kinds of things, machines, humans as well, and animals, so yeah.
I just quickly say that here Dominique is a gender-neutral name. We wanted to have it as such so that the pupils themselves can decide whether it's a girl or a boy, but they call it Dominique. They don't want it to be a girl or a boy. So, I mean, the women and male and female factors are not working here.
You asked about the features and how is there research on that. I cannot give an answer specific on that, but what we have observed from the learning situations with this machine is that the learners need to have eye contact, and they have to move very near to the robot. So I think that even though there are not any features of mouth or muscles that are moving, I think that the eye contact is something very precious that can be learned there. This is one of the things that we can look into the future, and it is certain. Because when you think about language use, and when you ask questions, do you want to go to the movies with me? There's, first of all, there's prosodic features, there are maybe question word, there's a syntax, but there's always your body posture and gaze. And the gaze is one part of the multimodality of interaction. So that could be one part that could be learned. But in some or in all, robot is one tool among others. So it cannot, of course, teach everything.
Yes, thank you for organizing this event. And I was interested in one of the pupils' comments on Lisa's presentation when they're given feedback on the experience talking to the robot and to Dominic, and saying that they wish that Dominic would give feedback and congratulate them on their good work and encourage them. Does Dominic give any such feedback, or is it just answer and reply, or is that, yeah, well done? Because in many games that you play, you get this, oh wow, now you got everything right, and so you get this feedback when you play games on computer, for example. And another interesting feature was with the accent, and perhaps the fact that you needed perhaps to repeat the phrase 100 times before the robot actually realized what was being said. And is it hindering or is it advancing language learning? Because with humans, they might understand you from the first not so nearly well pronounced sentence, and you could continue your talking with the person on other issues. But if you need to repeat the same sentence, you're not learning new things. You just give can we go to the movies together? Can we go to the movies together? And you just move on the same question without getting any further. So those two things came on to my mind.
Good questions. The repetitions are due to this poor speech recognition that this robot has, and the pitch of a child's voice is different from the adult voice, so it understands actually adults better. And that's not very natural, as you said. A benevolent interlocutor would understand the half of the phrase already, what the person wants to say. But what was the first one? It was about the feedback. Yes, it depends on the kind of applications we are using. If we are doing the targets and the learning task with these Elias applications, that is a software there. Then it gives feedback. It gets this candy blinking candy eyes. It says wow, well done, etc. But it doesn't give any personalized animated feedback more than that. And one of the researches I've been reading through now has been sort of suggesting that actually it's a good thing that it doesn't give too personalized feedback, because then the focus is still on the learning target itself. If it starts, doing a lot of things, then the focus might be distracted. But when we are doing with the choreograph, with the hardcore coding there, in that way we need to go a certain script, and when the pupil pronounces well and sort of is succeeding in the interaction, then Dominic might start singing or playing a saxophone or something as a recompense, sort of as a prize for the good pronunciation and interacting. But no, that he can't be doing any more than that.
Okay, so these will be the final words. I realize that there's a Finnish punainen lanka. We talked a lot about movement among all our discussions, and one story came to my mind. A good friend of mine was working with robots between Paris and Tokyo for a couple of years, and one day they had a meeting with the Japanese. There was a very hot topic, hot discussion, and the Japanese were saying, and this event was organized by the Institut Français. There's a reason there. So the Japanese were saying, we are good at making our robots moving, but we're not able to make them moving like the French move. The way you move, guys, and maybe it's a challenge for the future. Of course, the ability to combine, understanding social interaction, but also movement, feeling sense of connection with a machine. These are really important questions. There are ethic questions, moral questions to come as well. But it means that the best is probably yet to come. There are more discussions to have about this. So, but for today, we can only just thank you very much for being in mid-November so courageous to come and discuss with us about this very interesting topic. So Marjut Johansson, Nicola Hole, Lisa Peura, Teppo Jakonen, thank you so much for this very nurturing discussion and exchange. À vous tous, kaikille, everyone, merci beaucoup, thank you so much, and I wish you all a very good evening. Bonne soirée, hyvää iltaa jatkoa.